Welcome back, Soulful Society, to Soulful of Wellness,
the multi-generational podcast brought to you by two functional imperfectionists
and certified coaches
who deliver tips to live your most authentic and balanced life. Healthy boundaries are a crucial component to self-care, and when done right, can help you find more fulfillment and, we all want it, less stress, leaving more room for wellness in your personal life. Which is why today we're going over the what, why, who, when, and most importantly, how of boundary setting.
Before we get started in today's episode, we wanted to remind you that we are extending our giveaway for a free 1-year subscription to the app Calm, sponsored by our very own Soulful Society member, Kenny Fitzgerald. All you have to do is leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you've already left us a review, send us a screenshot of you getting a friend to leave us a review, and you will also be entered to win. We will draw a name and announce the winner sometime in May.
Today we're talking boundaries.
Boundaries. So important, yet not always used, right? We forget about them. We forget about them as a self-care tool.
I always hope that people are going to intuit the boundary I need and that the onus won't fall on me to set the boundary. I'm kind of thinking, read my vibes, figure it out. Don't make me tell you to back off, please. I don't want to have that conversation. It feels uncomfortable.
I feel that on a cellular level. I've never thought about boundary setting as its own part of self-care.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I always thought about it only as an option for people dealing with severities in their life.
A certain situation in need of immediate tending, more reactive than proactive.
Yeah.
But in the proactive sense, it really works for self-care because you're setting yourself up to have precisely the space that you desire.
Yeah, and it's interesting coming off of lockdown and COVID, where we kind of had this opportunity to go inward and spend a lot of time alone and a lot of time at home. And I feel like I've said this before, but I feel like we're kind of overcorrecting in society now. It's 2022. Things are moving quickly and fast and everyone's calendars are packed. So I feel like no time like the present to talk about boundaries as we re-enter in society.
It also shifted my perception of boundaries as primarily being a personal category. Now, more so than ever, people are feeling the need to set professional boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
It's the blurring of 9 to 5 into just kind of an always available around the clock.
Yes.
And we can't be always available around the clock.
Right. So we've had so much technological advancement in the last 10 years, but there hasn't been that onus and those teachings and the priority of, well, okay, now that we have all this technology, how do we deal with it personally? The effects of this technology, the effects of technically almost always being available.
Okay, that's interesting coming from your millennial perspective, because I started in the workforce before email was a common means of communication. I mean, we still had boxes and you would get your half slip with a little memo that would say, meeting today at 3 p.m. on a little half slip of paper printed out and shoved into every single box. We had email then, but it wasn't commonly used, and it wasn't the expectation that if you sent out an email, everyone would see it. And I remember it being stated at my job sometime in the 1990s that the expectation was that once a day you would check email. Doesn't that seem absolutely just, I don't know, like Stone Age now?
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of nice. But
you're right, it kind of does.
Wow, as opposed to being glued to your chair at home
Mm-hmm.
or your chair at work and just glued to the screen all day. I mean, we'll get into this in a moment. I guess we could talk about it now.
Okay.
Like, that's a perfect example of boundary setting. Is we've talked about this in our COVID episodes. The blending of all of your roles into one as you're working from home. And for those of us who are still working from home, we need to tend to ourselves more and set these boundaries when it comes to work, because otherwise you're just a machine.
You're wearing all the hats at once. All the hats are stacked up on your head
Oh, yeah.
and they're going to topple. Let's face it. You can't wear all the hats at
You
once.
can't.
It doesn't
Yeah.
work.
No. And when it comes to work specifically, this is really where you need to set your own personal boundaries so that it doesn't take over your life and your well-being to the point where you are stressing out.
And then you're not good at anything. You're not doing anything well because you're doing everything simultaneously kind of mediocre with completely divided attention.
Yeah.
So in your personal relationship to your spouse, that person's getting some, but not a lot of your attention. If you're a parent, same with your relationship with your child. You're kind of parenting at the same time, your work you at the same time, your friends, and everybody's texting or emailing or calling, and your attention is just so divided. And you're multitasking to the point where the hats are falling off.
Yeah.
They're just toppling.
So we, as your favorite coaches, are here to tell you, give yourself that permission to set those boundaries.
And we're going to help you with how to make it a little less daunting, because I know I find it intimidating. I think, oh, I've got to set some boundaries here. And I think, oh, I don't want to. Like, I just don't want to have that conversation.
I know, because it kind of is like linked with confrontation in my brain for some reason, which I hate.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel you on that. I really do. It's tough.
And I only have that feeling or that sense of, ugh, I don't want to, if it's too late, if somebody has already crossed the boundary. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be noticing and thinking it. So I have some vocabulary for us today. You ready for this?
Ooh. Yeah.
They're like ends of a spectrum. So healthy boundaries are in the middle of the spectrum. That's desirable. One end is called porous boundaries. Porous boundaries are when you basically don't have rigid enough boundaries that people respect them. They're too fluid to the point that, well, honestly, they're porous. Everything goes right through them. It's almost like they aren't even there. And then at the other end of the spectrum are rigid boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So they can break because they can't bend.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is on one end of the spectrum is like a yes person. Always going to be saying yes,
Mm-hmm.
always going to overcommit themselves and be kind of like running around and has an outward focus
Mm-hmm.
on other people, pleasing other people, saying yes. And then the other side of the spectrum, it sounds like, is someone who is rigid in their routines and rigid in their boundaries to the point where they're inflexible.
Yes. So here's some characteristics. You can think about your own behaviors and think what here sounds like you. Porous boundaries, people might tend to overshare personal information, have difficulty saying no, especially to requests of others that you want approval from, are over-involved with others' problems, dependent on the opinions of others or feedback from other people, even accepting of abuse or disrespect without standing up to it, and fears rejection if they don't comply with others. So at the other end are the rigid boundaries, avoids intimacy and close relationships, unlikely to ask for help, or possibly emotionally unable to ask for help, has few close relationships, keeps people at arm's length, very protective of personal information, details, experiences, may seem detached even with very close friends or a romantic partner, and keeps others at a distance to avoid the possibility of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
It's like self-protection. You tell yourself, well, if they reject me, they don't even know me, so it can't be personal.
Right.
Only that backfires because then nobody knows you. So then we have healthy boundaries. This is what we're going for. You value your own opinions. You don't compromise your values for others. That doesn't mean you don't compromise, of course. You just don't compromise on the big things. Shares personal information in an appropriate way, knows your personal wants and needs, and can communicate them effectively. And you are accepting when others say no to you. Yeah, no hurt feelings because people say no sometimes, because part of having good, healthy boundaries for yourself is honoring and respecting other people's boundaries, even if they're not the boundaries you choose for yourself.
That's an added benefit of learning how to set your own boundaries is you're more likely to respect other people's boundaries because you have that self-respect and that self-care. So you can understand, okay, they just need that for themselves and it's not personal.
That seems to be another theme of our podcast lately. It's not personal. The things we take personally, the things that hurt our feelings, the things that set us back or maybe even trigger us into a spiral, so often aren't about us. And if we could let that go, the whole anxiety would just come so far down.
It's so freeing to let go of the idea that it's personal.
Yeah.
So learning to show compassion and kindness to yourself is so crucial in setting healthy boundaries. And I feel like we often don't think about that because we're thinking about protecting ourselves, or we kind of think of like, there's something negative happening if I need to set a boundary. You know, it's sort of its intensity.
Yeah, something's gone awry and now it needs fixing. So you have to have that conversation, that one you're dreading. And I guess you and I are both coming it from more of the porous side.
Yeah.
So then we wind up feeling a little guilty or a little selfish because there's that seemingly starting point, like a real stepping out of like, now I am setting a boundary.
I had to set one last week. It was a family thing and it felt so weird. I felt guilty for a little bit, and then I started to sort of utilize my self-talk to say, no, you're listening to your body. Like, you actually can't physically take that on this week. And so I ended up actually being able to help 5 days later. But in that moment, I needed to set that boundary of like, I actually don't think my physicality can like hold up if I do that.
So what I'm hearing, and I hadn't really thought about it in this way as we were prepping for the episode, but what I'm hearing you saying and thinking, I guess I hear myself saying too, is that a lot of it comes from a place of self-awareness. You have to start with an awareness of your capacity, where you are currently, and what's already on your plate. And from that point, you can say yes or no, or some version of yes, but not until 5 days from now. As opportunities arise, invitations come in, work obligations are thrust upon you. The more self-aware you are, the better able you're going to be to make all the puzzle pieces fit.
Yes, exactly. Like understanding yourself, understanding your limits, understanding your triggers. It's going to help you discover and name and identify your boundaries.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? If we're starting from the basics of self-awareness, I think it would be tuning in to your behavior, observing it. I love journaling, and always going to be a tip that I love to share. And maybe, you know, reflection. I think it takes a certain amount of reflection and introspection to be able to identify your current behaviors.
Yes. Being self-aware, understanding your limits, understanding what is likely to trigger you. You all know, for me, it's a lot about being in the car, going someplace I've never been before, not knowing how to get there, not knowing where I'll park when I get there. All those things are likely to trigger me. So I have to factor that in when I'm thinking, how much can I take on this weekend or this Friday? However narrow I need the parameters to be. But as things are coming in, and as you said at the top of the episode, more and more. It's like, honestly, everybody's trying to make up for lost time.
Yeah.
I have had busier weekends lately than I've had in years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a default that we've all fallen into post COVID.
No.
We're not octopi. We're not able to say yes to everything. And so we really need to honor ourselves so that we don't burn out.
And sometimes you really want to. The things that you're saying no to are things you would love to say yes to.
Well, that's what makes it so hard. And that's what makes it such a challenge. And this year, particularly, there's so many wonderful and exciting things that we want to be a part of and that we want to do.
I know too much of a good thing makes them not such a good thing anymore. You're in the phase of life now where everybody's getting married. And I remember when I was in that phase, and I remember one particular little stretch in October where I had 3 weddings. And I love weddings. Let me just preface by saying I'm one of those people who's like, oh, wedding, love, everybody happy. I'm always excited for a wedding. I had 3 weekends in a row, all out of town. It was too much of a good thing. It was so stressful. So that meant it was 4 full weeks between me getting to spend a weekend at home and accomplishing all the things you need to do on weekends. I was like, God, if I could have just spread these out and had one a month for 3 months instead of one a week for 3 weeks.
Knowing your limits and knowing your triggers is really what's going to allow you to be able to like name these boundaries, to discover them. And so knowing ahead of time too is going to be able to help you communicate them.
And before something goes awry, help you troubleshoot what's likely to go awry. When you're conscious that you're feeling some kind of way, you're feeling a little off, a little uncomfortable, a little angry, a little edgy, just that buzzing of anxiety, tune into it.
Mm-hmm.
Try to not just be dismissive and power through. Try to give yourself a moment and say, has a boundary been crossed? Why am I feeling this way? What is this in response to? And then deal with it before it escalates.
This can be particularly helpful when working from home.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a time of day that you can physically shut your computer down to signal to your brain and to yourself, okay, I'm done for the day. I'm not taking calls. You know, when I go on vacation, I turn off my email and Teams notifications. If I don't see it, I'm not there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to protect myself
Yes.
and my energy while I'm on vacation, trying to take a break. So those are some mini tools that you can use. Take a lunch break. Actually take the time to make your meal during the day. It's important to nourish yourself and your brain and your body and to take breaks as well. So find those moments. Don't panic. I used to panic if I was like making lunch during the day and thought I missed an email or missed a message for someone. And then I've been thinking lately, I'm just trying to feed myself. Like, it's okay.
I also think every time I don't respond instantly, whether it's a work email or a friend texting, it's almost like training the person to not expect me to respond instantly. If my norm is, I'll probably get back to you in about an hour, then people can send the text and then check back in an hour and see what my response is.
Ooh, okay. But here's a good example of your healthy boundary setting, creating space for you to respect other people's boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take you and I, for example, with our texting. I never think twice if you take a long time to respond, because I'm thinking, oh, she's busy, she's napping, she's doing something, she'll respond to me later. I'm not going to take it personally, right? If you take a full day to respond, and you give me that same exact grace.
Yeah.
Which I so appreciate.
We know each other. So you know my things. You know I might be at the barn. If I'm with the horses, my phone's not with me. If you don't respond, I'll assume you're in the studio or, somewhere that you just didn't take your phone. I never once have thought, oh, I think Kaylin's ignoring me.
Right.
I will think, wait, did she tell me she's recording today? Or, something along those lines, but never my feelings hurt place.
Right. I give other people the same grace I give myself, which is like they, ran into something.
Right.
So here's some cool key components of setting a boundary that you need to know. Don't feel like you need to explain your no.
Mm-hmm.
Not over-explaining is a crucial aspect of setting boundaries, as everyone has the right to determine what they do and don't want to do. It could be as simple as someone inviting you out to get drinks that same night or in a few days, and you've just been going through a depressive episode, or you've been so exhausted lately dealing with a lot of things that you just know you don't have the energy for it. There's no harm in politely saying, "Oh, no, I'm so sorry, I don't have the energy, but I love you so much and would love to do this another time." Just make sure you actually follow up when you're feeling good, so that person feels valued. But again, if that person has healthy boundaries, they're going to understand your no and think, okay, yeah, she's really tired. She should rest.
Mm-hmm.
Just as if you're giving that gift to yourself. I'm really tired. I'm going to rest.
All right, I really like this one because this seems so doable to me. Keep the focus on yourself. So if you're setting a boundary with somebody from work, instead of saying something like, listen, you have to stop contacting me after work hours, say something like, I need some time to myself when I get home from work. Keep it all about you, not about what they can or can't do or should or shouldn't do. Just, I need, because it's hard for somebody to not respect, not impossible, but hard for somebody to not respect when you say, I need.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's a positive reframe. Same thing goes if you're living with roommates, having that boundary setting of, I just need my alone time. It's like, that's perfectly okay and perfectly normal. So just making sure, I guess the key in boundary setting is communicating. Communicate it, make it personal. So relate it back to yourself and not the other person. Be honest.
First, figuring out what you want from your various relationships, setting boundaries based on those desires, and then being clear with yourself and with other people about your boundaries. And part of having healthy boundaries is respecting healthy boundaries. Be respectful of others' boundaries and thereby avoid having your own boundaries crossed.
And don't forget our last important note. Don't take it personal. We hope that if you like this episode, you'll share it with a friend who you think could use some tips on setting some healthy boundaries. You can always reach us via email, sfowpodcast@gmail.com, as well as on Instagram. We're there. We're always going to answer you, and we so appreciate you. Don't forget to leave a rating or review if you haven't already.
Thanks for joining us again this week, listeners. Peace, love, and light.
Peace, love, and light. The Soulful of Wellness hosts are certified health and wellness coaches. This podcast is intended to inform and entertain listeners on their wellness journey. This podcast is meant to enhance, not replace, listeners' care from doctors, therapists, or other medical providers.